Hi, I'm Jessica Adducci.
And I'm Nick Adducci.
So we're a very creative couple. I'm a screenwriter, and he's an animator.
And she's a heck of a good producer.
I'm also a producer. So along with being kind of lifelong geek, and just certainly into creative things and imagination, I also grew up in the South, which to me is code for the Bible Belt.
The belt buckle.
The belt buckle of the Bible Belt, as I used to say growing up.
Tennessee.
And yeah, I'm originally from Tennessee, and so it's always around. Whether or not my family always went to church, my dad never went to church, but whether or not my mom and I were in church or not, it's around. I'm constantly exposed to it and everything else.
It's thick.
It's thick. So growing up, grew up in what's prevalent here is Baptist and everything, and made a decision to follow Christ when I was 7, got baptized. Would later realize that I didn't exactly. I ended up knowing a lot more about that decision when I was in my mid-20s. So I ended up actually entrusting my life to Christ at that point. I think when I was 7, I really wanted to know more. It was very intriguing to me. I mean, it wasn't hard for me to accept, especially with an imagination and, creativity, whatever. It wasn't hard for me to accept that there was a God and that Jesus existed, and I'd been taught about him in church and, all that stuff. But I wanted to know more, I think, at that point. And that was kind of the falling off point. Like, as soon as I was like, yeah, I'll follow Jesus, then everybody was just like, great, you're done. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm a huge rule follower kind of person. So I just followed rules for about 10 years until I didn't. And then I was like, okay, I guess I'm not a Christian anymore. I don't want to be a Christian anymore. And some of that probably had to do with, I used to work at a movie store, being exposed to interesting people, getting more exposed to indie films and geek oriented things, like off the beaten path kind of stuff. And just exploring. And I think I guess I probably didn't realize it until I became a Christian, and I was invited to a church by my best friend, who my best friend has been my best friend forever. And she's someone who invited me to church when I was 10, she's been along for the ride. And she invited me to church again in my mid-20s, and they were meeting in a movie theater. And I was like, well, it can't be that bad if it's meeting in a movie theater. That's pretty awesome. And it spoke directly to who I am. I also had a cousin going to the same church, which was very strange to me. I hadn't gone to church with them since I was a kid. So really starting out in a movie theater. And then it was kind of obvious that I was kind of an odd man out in the church, as far as everybody likes movies, especially nowadays. Being a geek has become way more acceptable and everything else.
Not the same as it was.
No. And even now, we just moved back to Tennessee, and even now it's sort of, you get kind of strange looks like, what are you into? What's going on? And, what do you have in your house? You've got a lightsaber in your house? What? Sometimes that makes you cool, and sometimes it makes you really weird. But I think going to that church was really awesome because they were nice about my weirdness, I guess, is the best way to put it. They were accepting, and they said, oh, that's what you do, that's who you are. And they just asked a lot of questions. I was kickboxing at the time too, which is not the most common thing. And they were very supportive of all that. They were like, oh, a little more supportive of sports, probably because sports are common around here. But still, they knew who I was, and they stumbled through conversations, if only to connect. And I very much appreciated that. And I'm pretty well known for it. We're back here, and I'm back at the same church that I was at in my mid-20s. And I know that if I walk up to any of them, they don't understand what I do as a filmmaker. They don't understand why I love what I love or any of that stuff, but they're like, you're cool. You're good. You do you.
Especially to the kids.
Yeah, we hit it off with the kids really well.
Yes, it's like, oh my gosh, you can talk about the things I spend all my time on, like movies and video games.
Yeah, I really don't feel 40. I feel like in my 20s still sometimes. But yeah, the faith geek crossover for me, it's still a struggle. It's still trying to find a church. I mean, we've been in a church for a while that didn't accept it. It never found a way to kind of go, oh, that's cool.
What
And
was that like, by the way? Like you
What?
said, like, oh, this place was very accepting.
Yeah,
And like, well, what was it like before? What was the reception before?
people just didn't know I was a geek.
They
I got geekier growing up.
Oh,
I didn't.
you were
I
just
mean,
weird before, then you could identify, oh, it's a geeky thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it got much more identified. I feel like geek stuff started out when I was a kid in the 80s. It was just either weird or creative. So I was a creative kid, not
Drawing
a
all
geeky
those
kid.
X-Men comics and all that other
Yes.
stuff you did.
Yes. I found the one person who collected Marvel cards when I was, in 6th grade. But anyway, I think, yeah, being in a church that doesn't understand or doesn't embrace that, doesn't engage in that, they just sort of go, oh, you're not into the things we're into, that's disheartening. So but since then, I mean, I've seen so many correlations. I've seen Lewis and Tolkien, of course, like leading names that you can name usually.
Chesterton. There's other people who have flourishes of creativity in not only how they speak, but what they create.
Yeah. Being able to see how that applies and see God in those stories. So not only are people, like when people actually engage with me and go, oh, hey, you like this thing, again, like not geeks necessarily, but when other people who don't understand church people, whatever, they go, oh, you like that thing? And I'm like, yeah, because God's there. And then I get to like talk about that. And that's common ground where we get to accept each other. And so it's interesting to try to flip it and go, okay, you're a geek and that's our common ground. Now let's talk about God. Like that can be a little tougher. But again, I love the example of Lewis and Tolkien, where Tolkien basically told Lewis, you have to have imagination. You have to have creativity, not because you're making God up, but because he exists beyond reality. He exists in the supernatural. So yeah, trying to continue to always find ways to express that and have those who are geeky understand you're very necessary to the church. And that acceptance I felt with that first church, I think that's what I felt like. I felt like a missing piece, and they were okay with that. They accepted that. They loved that. And if there was anyone geeky who came along, or anyone who was like a little weird, go to Jess. Like I was that person, and that's a nice feeling. And that started to happen in Kentucky as well, where we were kind of just the go-to people for weirdos and people that struggled with certain things, and people that struggled with traditional church culture. Yeah,
there's a bit of so I'll say my part then. Like I want to make sure I'm seeing the cues. So anyway, yeah, and to jump off that last point a little bit with Tolkien and Lewis, I love how it's a great essay. Anyone who's creative, you need to look up. It was a book, or was it an essay or something?
It was an essay on Art of Manliness.
Well, that one was an essay, but there was also like the actual, I think, book or something that you could look up.
I can't remember where he got his information.
Well, anyway, Tolkien and Lewis have dialogues back and forth that are documented and probably printed in a book somewhere. But from the gist of it that I remember, having paraphrased it numerous times, like Tolkien touched on how people generally reacted to people who lived in books too much, they lived in the imagination world and not the real world. And they would do things that seem useless to a lot of people, especially in the church now. It's like, well, traditionally have been. It's like, you're in fantasy. This is reality. We need real people to see you. We need real people to do things. And playing video games too much is the same kind of thing. It's like, it's the same kind of, you're wasting your life and all that sort of thing. It's that perspective. And Tolkien touched on something where now escapism is an interesting word, because it gets associated with the flight of the deserter, as in you should be here helping us do the work, but you're deserting us, often to wasting your time doing other things and leaving us to pick up the slack.
Right.
But instead, escapism is just someone trying to escape reality for a minute. as in,
I think he likened it to a prison. If I'm in a prison cell, of course I'm going to imagine the outside.
yeah. And in a way, he used that as an example of people need to escape reality to find refuge from pain and suffering in the world. That's why during the Great Depression, people went to go see movies at record numbers.
Well, not just escape, but imagine hope.
And imagine what they could do. Imagine heaven. Imagine a place to pursue. And that's part of what you need as a Christian. You need to be able to put yourself in Moses's time. You need to be able to imagine that, immerse yourself in that. That's really difficult to do if you don't have any practice at it, if you don't immerse yourself in stories or the idea of art or the idea of what was that really feeling like when God wrote the 10 Commandments and was a blaze of glory no one could look at. Like, it's amazing stuff.
We get to imagine these things for a living.
This is
like,
this is fun for us. But anyway, off that, I'll go back to where I came from to find that sort of thing. So I grew up in the upper Midwest, mostly North Dakota, born in Chicago, moved to North Dakota, that kind of thing. My parents are Catholic, and I was raised Catholic, nominally Catholic. Dad's nominally Catholic, attends on Christmas. That's pretty much it. Mom, seriously Catholic and very devoted.
Irish Catholic.
Yep, that's the look and the hat and everything. So even though my name is Adducci, it's Italian. Also, by the way, you ask an Italian what is their religion, it's Catholic because I'm Italian. Duh. You would never even question that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So anyway, and in North Dakota, or a lot of the Midwest, probably the same. The makeup of the church up there is there's 2 churches in every town, no matter how small it is. It can be 50 people. There's 2 churches, at least one Catholic and at least one other that is Protestant of some stripe, Lutheran or sometimes just basic evangelical or we don't have a big storied history yet in the upper Midwest.
In the Protestant world.
It's like, well, no, the Protestant world has plenty of stuff, but it's like in the Midwest, there's not a ton of history going on. There's not like a, that sort of thing where the settlers and anyway, but there it was basically you attend church because it's what everybody does. And it felt like empty ritual for a lot of it to me, but I did end up going anyway. And my mom connected with me because unlike my dad, I could definitely, I could unquestioningly know that she loved me. She made that clear. She always fought for me. She always sacrificed for me. And I knew she didn't have to do that all the time. And so I could always say, maybe I'll give God a chance because my mom believes it so much. So I'll try that. Even no matter how depressed I got in my time of being a weirdo and not accepted.
He was more of a weirdo than I was.
Yeah. You're into Pokemon and you're how old? You're like, why are you drawing like cartoons? Ugh. Aren't you like 12 now? It's like, you should be like into girls and stuff. And it's like, yeah, but I'm shy and I don't really want to do that. And it's like, you have no idea how many times I was asked, are you gay or what? It's like and yes, much more colorful language.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's like by my dad and other people about like trying to constantly question, whether or not you're acting right. And it was I grew very resentful of it over a long time. I don't care. I don't really want to talk to any of you because you don't want to talk to me about anything I care about. And when I do bring it up, it's checks out immediately. And it's like, or you just get sort of seen like you're weird. So you
were definitely the Lewis. It was all empty ritual, I don't know if you ever called yourself atheist by any stretch, but
I probably never went that far with it. I figured God either doesn't care or he may not exist, but I'm like, I just don't think he cares.
But I think the Lewis and Tolkien thing resonates because then you met Tolkien.
That's right. My best friend, AJ, who I met in my freshman year of high school, although we had known each other, our parents knew each other before that. But we actually got to hang out a lot more. And I realized, oh my gosh, he's just like me in so many ways. But he's this unironically dutiful, I want to be a knight in King Arthur's court kind of guy.
Paladin.
He's totally into the Renaissance fair and actual like LARPing and stuff, and love him to death. He's great. Went into the military and everything. But he was the first person I had encountered who was someone I could relate to, who actually took God and pursuing him seriously. He was the first person I met who was like, you know what? No, I'm not going to hang out and do video games right now. I actually had time. I wanted to do my quiet time at this time of the day, so I'll talk to you later. That just sort of threw me for a loop. So I'm like, what? Serious? That's stuff you do on Sunday or something, or when people have to watch you. So anyway, just seeing that made me really want to figure out, okay, is this real? And I started debating him and arguing with him, doing copious research and trying to figure out, like, okay, so what is this?
He also happens to be very intelligent. So
yes.
their debates are thorough.
Yeah, hours long.
Which is good to find someone who, you know, cares enough and has that kind of background that he can have those conversations.
And ultimately, no one ever really won because there was always more research to do, but it was always this kind of, okay, so someone who I think I can respect really does believe this. And it's not just my mom who, bless her heart, is very, very sincere, but I didn't think thought very deeply about much of it. It was mostly faith was the answer and questioning, why do that? It's like, and I'm like, okay, but, but yeah, to find that there is in fact a fulfilling life to be had pursuing God, even with all these kinds of things I'm into. I want to dive deep into these fictional worlds like Tolkien's world, like or even like shows that like Firefly or the Marvel comics, or there's or even video games, the worlds of Final Fantasy or Zelda, or lots of other fun things where you get to live in these worlds as someone who has like a destiny, some kind of really great story to live out. Though it's more simple in these worlds. So you actually can feel like you're pursuing that in a way that is harder in the real world sometimes.
Well, I think it's, I don't disagree, but I think it's also, it's expressing something the real world can't express. You're playing through something that, that not just you don't get the chance to or whatever, but like you can't experience that.
No, I can't slay a god in God of War. I can't ride dragons, you know, across the clouds or something like that. It's like, those are fun things, but the imagination of it is truly wonderful. Because one of my current projects is to try to figure out what is heaven like and what should we imagine it to be like in some ways, because I would love to see it better than the one depicted in Tom and Jerry, where whenever Tom dies, he has to go in a white robe with a plastic harp and a plastic halo and a harp, and that's it. Which is from Dante's Inferno, by the way. So it's not really actually a biblical depiction of anything. It's so anyway. So fun. That was kind of my journey. I met people who gave me milestones to be like, you know what, maybe I could take God seriously. And there was some other bits of drama kind of in there, but basically at a certain point I had to say, you know what, this God question really does need some answering, and I frankly can't avoid it. If I'm going to spend my life on something, I should make it be something I'll be happy with even at the end of my life. So I wanted to do, you know what, God, I'll give you this shot. If this is real, if what you say is real and legitimate, I've never seen it. It's never convinced me yet that it is because other people have done it. I haven't seen it myself. So I'll give you my shot. I took my sketchbook, and it was my sketchbook I carry with me all the time, and I gave it to God. And that was sort of like, you know what, I'll try this, and I'm going to give it a real shot. And honestly, the next day, I felt very different. It was actually the kind of thing where I didn't resent people for thinking I was weird all the time anymore. Like, that was huge to me. Like, all of a sudden, I don't have that just tension always, like feeling like I'm being left out and ignored. And
you could be you.
Yeah.
And God was okay with that.
I felt more free in a way. Kind of like how a lot of people say they come out and stuff. I'm like, I came out to God, and he accepted me. So I'm like,
as a geek, as a weirdo.
And no matter what other people, they don't get it, that's fine. Yeah. God gets me, and that's actually enough.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it was a bit like that. And from then on, I was trying to figure out, what do I do with all of this? What do I do with my life? And what do I do to try and keep pursuing God while I do what I want to do, which was I wanted to keep drawing. I wanted to tell stories. And long winding road led me to what I do now. I actually do animation. I do it for cartoons. I do advertisements for people as well. I've created mascots. I've worked for churches. I've worked for mission organizations. I've done videos and short films, and I've even worked on video games a little bit now, and I'm hoping to do a lot more of that in the future. So that's kind of how we've got here.